Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us once again, Catherine Austin Fitts. She's at Solari.com. She has the famous Solari report. And, of course, Catherine Austin Fitts. Well, first of all, let me welcome you, and I'll continue with your introduction. Catherine, welcome to USA Watchdog.
Thank you. It's always a delight to be here. This is how I get to talk to you.
I know, it's good. I know you were, all this is on Solari.com, but I just scratched the surface of your deep resume. You've handled, hundreds of billions of dollars of assets and, $25 billion in transactions. You, of course, were an assistant housing secretary in the Bush 41 administration. You're an investment banker. You have a very, very deep resume, and you are one of the best qualified people I have on this site. And there's a lot to talk about. So I'm ready to hit you with some big questions.
Well, you have a lot of very qualified people, so I take that as a huge compliment.
Well, I'm going to lump you in with some people who are really good. Dr. Faber, Jim Rogers, and Jim Rickards. And these are people who are in your echelon of big hitters. And, Dr. Faber says that this is a chess game, and the system, this is where, at the end, the whole system collapses. This is all recently, incidentally. These interviews were done in different parts of the world, around the globe. Jim Rogers he's told me on this site that, what we're doing has never happened in recorded history. All these countries, including the U.S., are printing money like crazy, and this is going to end badly, and I want to get what you think badly looks like. And then Jim Rickards, who, of course, is the best-selling author of Currency Wars, and he says the most likely outcome is a dollar collapse. What do you think... Tell me what your take is on how this is shaping up here in, mid-2013.
Well, I think I look at it, I think, very differently than the gentleman you just described. What I see, Greg, is we had in North America, we've had an industrial economy in the developed world. And what we did in the 90s is we had what I call a financial coup d'etat. We pulled an enormous amount of money out of that system, and we've moved it into a new system. We'll call it the breakaway civilization, is one of the terms I give to it. In fact, the Solari report this week is on the breakaway civilization. So think of it as, old systems, new systems. We've sucked an enormous amount of capital out of the old systems and moved it into the new systems. The new systems are going gangbuster. They're very resource rich. And if you drive around the parts of the country where they're reinvesting, they're doing unbelievably well. Now, what we've done is we've left the liabilities in the old system. So we've left the retirement liabilities, we've left Medicare and Medicaid in the old system when we suck the resources out. So they look terrible. Are those systems grinding it out and collapsing? Yes, they are. But
can I just put in one tip of the iceberg system? Are you talking about systems like Detroit with $18.5 billion in debt, $9 billion underfunded pensions? 40% of the streetlights don't work. I mean, it's a colossal mess in Detroit. Is that what you're talking about? The old?
Well, I would say it's a combination of things in Detroit. I mean, basically, you moved the businesses, you moved the people elsewhere. You left the liabilities sitting within the municipal entities and some of the state entities, and now you're going to abrogate them and write them down. So this is this is no different than a company where you've taken the flow, you've moved it into another company, sort of sub rosa, and left your liabilities hanging, and so the creditors are left with nothing, and you've got the goodies someplace else.
So if the old system are things like, Detroit and pension funds and, what's left of Social Security and what's left of all these entitlements, and the new system is what?
The new system is a series of pools of capital and companies and infrastructure, which is building a whole new system. So if you look at North America, what I see is the build out of new infrastructure, new companies. We're integrating a lot of unbelievable new technology, but it's in a private infrastructure controlled by private investors, and a lot of the legacy liabilities are left in the sovereign governments. And so the question for many of us is, what's the exit game on the sovereign governments? How are we going to slug through those liabilities and obligations? How are those going to get sorted out? Some are going to get written down. Some are going to get parceled out and slowed down. Some are going to get abrogated. It's going to be a mishmash of things. But
you may
if you take...
Go ahead.
Well, let's just pretend we have a company called USA, okay? And we create a new company called Breakaway Civilization. So we move all of our assets out of Company USA, and put them in Breakaway Civilization, right? But we leave the liabilities. So we leave the union obligations, we leave the pension funds, we leave all of that over in USA, right? Now, is North America collapsing, or have we just moved the assets out of reach of the liabilities?
You've moved the assets out of the reach of the liabilities. You've cordoned them off.
Right. So one of the things we see over the last year is we see G7, who basically are a group of people responsible for the legacy systems, arguing, well, let's target the tax havens. Well, what is the tax havens? The tax havens is where the Breakaway Civilization is putting a chunk of their money, right? Right? So the overt part of the economy is saying to the covert part of the economy, wait a minute, you can't stick us over here with the liabilities. We want some help. We want you to pay taxes. We want you to obey the law. So you're seeing a tug of war between the new system that's coming up and the old system that's struggling and dying. And the problem in the old system, it gets back. I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal article this week, Obama's Fed circus. So we've seen a real circus this week over the Fed, and everybody's waiting with bated breath to see what Bernanke does tomorrow. But literally what you've got the central bankers and G7 struggling to deal with the old system, and nobody wants to turn around and tell the different constituencies the truth. So we had the
truth is, hey, your pension was $1,500 and now it's $150. That's the truth. The truth is you can't have medical benefits into the future for free.
The truth is, between fiscal 1998 and 2002, $4 trillion went missing from the federal government. We just gave the banks, depending on how you count it, $27 trillion. And you add it all up, my back of the envelope, totally back of the envelope, I could never prove this in a court of law, is $40 trillion. There's, as Ross Perot would say, there's a huge sucking sound out of sovereign governments and into private hands. Now that $40 trillion went somewhere, Greg. It's someplace. And if you drive around the places where it's reinvesting, those economies are going gangbuster.
You're talking about the Balkan Valley. You're talking about the Balkan Valley. You're talking about the farm communities in Illinois and Missouri. I go back to Missouri, and people are driving new cars. I see new combines in the field. Right.
So let's talk about the new economy. Let's talk about what the new economy looks like. The first thing you're doing with the new economy is you're building domestic oil and gas. 40% of the cost of manufacturing this country is energy, right? So you build a domestic oil and gas infrastructure, and you dramatically reduce our cost of energy, make us unbelievably competitive vis-a-vis Europe and Asia, including China. So you bring the cost of energy down. You consolidate agriculture into this huge breadbasket, which they've done, and then you start to build out a whole new manufacturing infrastructure. And what you see if you go across America is we are now building, you're having an explosion in fabrication technology, you're having an explosion in material sciences, you're starting to build a very explosion in robotics, you're starting to build a whole new infrastructure of, some call it the third industrial revolution. But you're moving towards putting the United States back into a very powerful place in terms of manufacturing. Now, that's not going to translate into huge employment, but it's going to translate into a real juggernaut of oil and gas, agriculture, manufacturing. Okay?
But before we get to that point, here's what I want to ask you. Aren't we still, the capital you talk about, the $40 trillion are dollars, Federal Reserve notes. And the Fed has been printing them like candy wrappers and toilet paper. We're going to print $1 trillion in 1 year with open-ended and QE with the $85 billion a month for the Treasury market, whatever. I mean, this isn't going to be pain-free. There are going to be some big losers. Am I right?
They're absolutely going to. There have been big losers for the last 20 years. There are going to be more big losers. But let me tell you what I think the Fed's been doing. You think the Fed's been printing money. I think the Fed has been buying up fraudulent mortgage paper.
Well, yeah.
In other words, in 1989, we had a fraud epidemic during Iran-Contra, the S&L crisis. When it was over, we auctioned off the paper, and that was a problem because the paper was full. The mortgage paper was full of criminal liabilities, and so there was a big issue of how you clean it up without the criminal liabilities causing everybody to have a war with each other. Because you auction off some of that paper, and it turns into the Hatfields and McCoys. So this time around, the fraud was much too great to do the auctions. What did they do? They kept it on the bank's balance sheet. They floated some of it out with the bailouts, and finally the Fed said, okay, we'll buy it and shred it. So I think what the Fed's been doing is buying and shredding, and the reason the Fed is turning around and saying, okay, we're ready to taper, is because they've shredded up most of the fraudulent paper. They've pulled it in with the bailouts. They've pulled the rest in with this QE2, QE3, and now they finished shredding it, and now they're ready to turn and say, okay, banks have to shrink. And that's why I said the last time you and I spoke, I think bail-ins are coming. But
There's where the losers are coming. So bail-ins are coming. So even if you have your $250,000 and it's insured, can you go to the bank and get $25,000? Can you go get your money? We got $10.8 trillion on deposit, $33 billion in.
I believe in the United States. I believe in the United States you will be able to. In other words, yes, in Cyprus the insured deposits weren't honored. You couldn't get them, so they were held back. But I believe in the United States you should be. The U.S. can always arrange more dollars. In other words, we have the power to print, and we have the power to print as long as we have the military force on this planet. I think the big question is not, will we be able to get our insured deposits? I think the big question is, how violent will things get?
Oh, there's going to be some losers. I mean, there's going to be people hammered. And people who've got, $1 million in the bank are going to end up with $250,000. Woo! And then what happens? What happens with all these people?
Wait. It depends on which bank you're in. Not all banks are going to be bailed in. Okay, now, remember, the biggest bail-in targets are going to be in the tax havens. What was Cyprus? Cyprus was a tax haven, right? It's an offshore haven. And essentially what G7 is saying is, we want you guys to come back and pay taxes. We want you to finance our operations. We're having a war on about cost of capital. So they're looking at all that money sitting offshore and saying, we need you to play in our system. That's what that's about.
Is the dollar going to collapse, as Jim Rickards says? I didn't even interrupt you, but is the dollar going to end up collapsing with this deal? I mean, could this get out of control with the $630 trillion in derivatives, according to the BIS? Some people say it's double, triple that. But is the dollar going to end up collapsing? Can they do this without imploding the system?
It's always possible. Anything is possible in the sense that when you have a very centralized system that's fragile, anything is possible if you have fighting. So if it's a big planet, it takes a lot to run the financial system. So if people start squabbling and stop cooperating, could you absolutely have another 2008? Yes. In theory, could you have another collapse? Yes. It's in theory possible. I don't think, to me, the bigger chance, the bigger risk is that we have war. I mean, how have we covered shortages throughout history? Well, for the last 5,000 years that I can tell, when there's not enough, somebody kills somebody else and takes their stuff, right?
That's right.
Now, wars are both overt and covert, but what you're going to see is, the guys with the bigger guns and the bigger weapons are going to shoot the guys who don't have those bigger guns and bigger weapons.
I'm glad you brought that up because, this fall they're going to have this G20 meeting, and one of the big things in China, this meeting that they're going to have, the byline is from currency chaos to global currency, and I can't imagine how all the people in the East and the BRICS want to continue to support the U.S. dollar with all the money printing. Is that what you're talking about? Saying, oh, you mean you think you're going to? This is this is Hotel California. You don't understand. You can check out, but you can never leave.
Well, wait. See, I'm on the other side of this argument. That what we've seen for the last 6 months is G7 saying to G20, what G7 gives, G7 can taketh away. And we've literally seen capital pulled back. We're literally seeing a recession back from the BRIC nations back into North America and the developed world. So G20 was flexing its muscles and strutting its stuff. Instead, we're saying G7 saying, wait a minute, if, just please remember who's boss. We're going to pull the capital back. And that's why we've seen the emerging markets trade off so much.
That's why China's in trouble? Is this why China is also hitting it?
I think they're getting a little puppy training about who's boss. So
really?
I think you're seeing a little exercising of power, if you will, by G7, and a little message about who's boss. And you're clearly watching in North America an effort to shift oil and gas, which is going to power shift Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, shift manufacturing, which is going to, power shift China and Asia, shift agriculture. America is now organizing to be a real powerhouse, whether we like it or not.
But in this organization, this is what I want to warn people about, because in this organization, there are going to be some real losers. And there's going to be some people who are going to probably lose some of their money depending on their bank. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, here's going to be the real loser. The real loser is going to be, if you look at the current health care and Medicare and Medicaid payment systems, I think it was Carl Deniger had a wonderful video. I had it up on the blog where he said, if you just multiply out the current growth rate, it's going to be bigger than the GNP, within, I forget what it was, something like 7 years. Yeah. But we have a squeeze coming in healthcare, which is remarkable. And, you have a whole generation of baby boomers in the developed world, both in Europe and here, who are counting on a whole level of healthcare benefits that are never going to happen. Now, there are ways of completely shifting that, because if you look inside of those expenses, Greg, there are unbelievable numbers of ways to radically re-engineer the whole healthcare scene in a way which is fine for people and fine for the taxpayers, but it's a radical re-engineering. So, for example, in last year, our hero of the year was Joe Cross, who's the Australian who made Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. And it's a movie about his juicing fast across America. He gets a trucker named Phil Staples on a juicing fast, and the guy goes from 430 pounds to, I think, 180 pounds. It turns into the picture of health. And at one point in the movie, he points out that juicing vegetables organically is $28 a day, conventionally is $14 a day, and Phil Staples' brother's heart attack cost $55,000. Okay, now, so if you look at how we organize our healthcare budget in this country, we eat rotten food, we live unhealthy lifestyles, and then we proceed to try and treat it on the back end with extraordinarily expensive healthcare treatments. Well, it doesn't work. You've got to reinvent the whole process from beginning to end, how you live, what you eat. I mean, there are many, many ways for Americans to be much healthier than we are at much lower cost. Because if you look at our healthcare budget, we're spending much more per person, and we're getting much less of a result. Why is that? So you're talking about radical reengineering. So let me give you another example. So let's look at the food stamp program. I live in a state where our economy has been decimated by hundreds, if not thousands, of small farmers going out of business. Not because of economics. No. Because of rules and regulations. Food safety rules and regulations has put hundreds and hundreds of dairy farmers out of business all over the state whose business is very economic. Now, meantime, what are those people now doing? Well, those people are getting unemployment insurance, they're getting welfare, and they're getting food stamps. And they're going down to Walmart with their food stamps, and they're buying food that's shipped in from Latin America, and that food is making them sick. Now, if you look at the jobs associated with those food stamps, what you'll find, for example, is all the data servicing jobs for all the people in Tennessee who are on food stamps are being outsourced to JP Morgan Chase in India. So the U.S. government is paying people in India to do jobs that people who are sitting here being paid not to work could be doing. Why is that? Well, I can come up with thousands and thousands of examples where the taxpayer is paying 2 to 3 times for a function that's totally unnecessary. In other words, the whole federal government budget is way pumped up with highly uneconomic things that could be re-engineered and make a much healthier society, a much stronger economy, and a much lower government deficit.
in the old economy, that is going to collapse. The new economy is being set up right now. That's what you're saying. The old economy is going to collapse. Right. This is going to come with bank failures, I take it. And is it going to come with stock market, brokerage failures like MF Global? Is it going to come with, bond failure in the treasury market?
It's what it's going to come with is extraordinary volatility. Now, I would give it a reasonable chance that, if possible, what I think they're going to try and do is engineer a long-term bull market in equities. You have the long-term bull market in bonds coming to an end.
Yes.
And the reality is you have two choices. You can have a long-term bull market in equities and inflate the system up through the equity, or you can have a crunch of mega crunch proportions of the kind you're talking about.
But that would entail them to suppress interest rates, for years into the future. And is the Fed going to do that? I mean, as soon as they quit buying this Treasury debt, we had that a couple of months ago, and boom, 30-year mortgage money went up about 100 basis points, and you had, a mini crash in the stock market. What happens when they stop printing all this money to suppress the Treasury market? We got to put that out there on bid. What happens with that? I don't understand how we get to this nirvana.
I'm not sure it's the printing that's bringing it down so much as a variety of other actions, some of them very forceful, but including derivatives. So I think the derivative book, the biggest portion of the derivative book is interest rate swaps.
It's 80%.
And the interest rate swaps have been very effective. But the other thing is we see enormous capital controls all throughout the G7, which are very instrumental in keeping. If you talk to any of the small banks, what they say is the pressure on them from the regulators to buy long treasuries instead of invest in, lending money on Main Street. And a lot of that is very deflationary pressures coming from regulation. So I think, we're watching capital controls throughout the G7. So it's many different things that's bringing down interest rates. I think interest rates are going to, slowly rise a little bit, but think of it this way. Your new economy is coming up in the corporate world, so it's all private-owned, private corporations. Your old world is the legacy systems or sovereign governments. So if you want to bring up corporations and bring down sovereign governments, you want the bond market to slowly, the bull end, and you want equity markets to do well. So in 1989, when we saw the housing market collapse, we had the huge credit crunch, we had the whole S&L crisis, the equity markets went up. And that's because you were watching corporations come in and use a very low cost of capital to buy up everything cheap. So if you're going to bring up a whole new system in a corporate world, you've got to have the equity markets do well.
But this could go. I mean, I hate to keep coming back because I want. In my world, I'm not going to be fabricating parts. I'm not going to drill an oil well in North Dakota. I mean, there's a lot of people that ain't going to. They're like in your world around Tennessee. They're on food stamps and they're unemployed, and so this could get out of control. I mean, that's the transition could be nasty, messy, ugly. That's what I'm saying. All of a sudden, we take away somebody's pension.
It's already. See, you're in North Carolina.
Yes.
I live in a place where people started eating GMO food in 1995, and now it's, 18 years later, and they've been poisoned. They walk around like they're zombies. They are dying. If you look at the life expectancy from 1990 until now of somebody without a high school education in America, the life expectancy for women has dropped 5 years and 3 years for men since 1990. Okay? And that's because it's, the Great Depression has been where I live for years. You have everybody eking along on disability or on Social Security, and the food is poisoning them. The chemtrails spraying over their head is poisoning them. I mean, basically, you have people who've been, Armageddon has already come. It's here. It's been here for a long time.
Let's talk about your bail-ins with the banks. What does that look like? I got an account at Bob's Bank, and I've got $50,000 into it, and what do they wake up one day and say, hey, there's a bank holiday? Aren't they going to take that bank holiday and change the currency? Aren't they going to do something dramatic? They're not just going to close the banks down.
Well, I think they would like to move to a much more digital currency, but I don't see that they're ready to do that yet. Now, I could be wrong. And there's always some small percentage that we get a radical debasement. In other words, you go to bed and gold's at 1,300 and you wake up the next morning and it's, at 3,000. So in theory, you could see something like that to recapitalize the system. I just don't see it. I don't see the dollar collapsing. Why would it? Where's the stronger currency? I mean, for the dollar to collapse, you need the U.S. military and the U.S. government to collapse. That's what you're talking about.
And that's not going to happen.
And I just don't see. Well, I just don't. Why would it happen? In other words, what happens is war.
So you think we're going to go to war with Russia over Syria, over China? The Russians were having military drills out on their eastern part of the country.
I don't think we have to go to an over war. And I think Putin's a very clever fellow. Before we go to nuclear war with Putin, we'll divide up the world and agree, let him steal some, and, we'll cut up the winnings. So we'll cut him in for the winnings. But I just don't think that the U.S. military or the people who run the United States government are going to say, okay, we're happy to collapse rather than go to war. They're going to go to war. They're going to shake somebody down. And the next somebody is the tax havens. And I think that's where the bail-ins will be. We may have bail-ins in the weaker countries in Europe because here's the thing, you have Basel III coming and you have to downsize the capacity in the banks. You have more banks than you need. You don't need this percentage of the economy dedicated to speculative financial stuff, particularly on the debt side. You need your financial capacity dedicated to building that equity market, and that's why you're going to see this fall crowdfunding come out, and you're going to see the development of a whole new world of venture capital and I think IPO market.
Do you think that gold and silver are going to be good buys in this transition period? I mean, I look at it like a transition device, a core asset. I tell people not to trade the gold market. You want to hold it as a core that people can't get because who knows how you don't know how this is going to work out. So my question to you is,
we're dealing in a situation which is purely political. And in a purely political situation, any asset can be in the doghouse for some period of time, particularly if they want to accumulate it. Because right now, we're seeing the price of gold come down because they want to bring in more. It's a form of confiscation through the marketplace. But I think, gold to me is the greatest form of insurance you can have during a transition period because it's money globally, it's liquid globally, and it's something that's recognized globally as having value. And so even, whether we go into deflationary scenarios or inflationary, it's going to hold its value in terms of its value in gallons of milk or, loaves of bread. And so I think you want to have gold as a core position. People always ask me what percentage of my portfolio should I have gold, and I can't relate to that. Everybody's different. My attitude is how many people are you responsible for in the worst case, and how much do you want per person, which is how much do you need per month and how many months do you want to provide for. That's how much gold you need is, so to me it's an insurance policy. Now, it can also be an investment, but I think you have to be savvy. It's unbelievably volatile, as we've seen this year.
You got to be able to hold it through the big dips. You got to be able to not be shaken out. Oh, I need to cash out and go to college. I need to cash out and right here at 1,300. I mean, you want to be able to be, right. A strong hand is what they call them.
Well, although, I'm a money manager in one of our positions, we moved out. We moved to cash, and I don't think it's bottomed yet. Now, we may buy back in. But there's a point at which I think, I'm not willing on some assets to ride it all the way down. So I've always thought the bottom could be as low as, 1,100. I'd rather sell and then buy back in.
Can you get a hold of it, though, at 1,100? That's my question. Because a lot of people would like to do, time the bottom, and then when it comes time to get it.
But I don't like to time the bottom. I'd much rather confirm, I'd rather, prove the bottom and then confirm an upward trend and buy back in then.
So is it going to be available with all this, COMEX vaults are reportedly losing a lot of gold. GLD is losing a lot of gold. LBMA, China's a big buyer. Russia's a big buyer. The BRIC countries are big buyers of gold and silver.
I think it will be available, yes. But remember, I'm talking about a securities position, not a physical position. your core position you always want in physical that you control.
And
So your core position is an insurance position. You want to have physical that you control. Okay. Now I'm talking about owning in securities, which is an investment position. That's different.
you're talking about GLD?
So I don't use GLD. So,
Okay, so you're talking about an ETF of some type, it's Sprott Asset Management or something like that.
yeah.
Somebody who actually
But I think
has this gold and silver in the
I
bowl.
think there are vehicles that are much more. I have a lot more confidence in the collateral than I do with GLD. If you want to know more about GLD, I have a great article called "Precious Metals Puzzle Palace" that's about GLD and SLV and questions about the quality of the collateral and the depository arrangements.
And then the last question, I'm going to wrap this up. I mean, so obviously you've laid out this case of there's a new economy building, and you may not be seeing it, but it's in agricultural, it's in manufacturing, a new type of manufacturing. It's in oil and natural gas. That's what all the fracking's about. And then there's the old economy that's tied to, the Detroits of the world. And that's going to go bye-bye. And, all this free health care and all these pensions, $3.7 trillion underfunded pensions in America. I mean, it's just astronomical. Is this going to get violent? A friend of mine asked me, he says, what do you think is going to happen?
It's going to get very ugly, but I don't think it's going to get violent in the sense of rioting in the streets or a revolution, but I think it's going to get very ugly. It's going to be very painful. What was the number one most popular series of books in the 90s? It was a series called Left Behind. And why was everybody feeling left behind? Because the capital was being moved out and they were being left behind. So you have a whole world of people who are being left behind. What the battle about, with Ben and the Fed this week is literally the Fed saying, look, Congress, you have to start to take responsibility to clean up your fiscal house. We can't just keep buying this paper. We've shredded the mortgage now we want you to start cleaning things up. Congress is saying, no, we don't want to do that. We'd rather you keep printing. And that's what we're watching back and forth is. It's going to come to the head this fall when we go into the debt crisis. So
there's going to be some real, when you say ugly, I mean, people are going to be losing their pensions. People are going to be losing their jobs. The old economy is going to crumble. That's going to look like a collapse to some people. To people in the new economy, it's going to be like, what collapse? Is that what you're telling me? The tale of two worlds here?
Can I say it another way?
Yes.
Okay, so you remember my red button story?
Oh,
in the summer of 2000, I asked a wonderful group of people what would happen if we stopped laundering $500 billion to $1 trillion of all dirty money, okay? And who would push the button if it would stop all hard narcotics trafficking in their neighborhood? And out of 100 people dedicated to evolving our society spiritually, only one would push the button. The other 99 said they wouldn't push the button because they didn't want the stock market to go down. They didn't want their government checks to stop. They didn't want their taxes to go up. Okay, so for ever since World War II, we, the American people, have engaged in a non-sustainable economy, selling drugs to our neighbors, running around the world, stealing from everybody else, and behaving in horrible ways, in exchange for all these promises that have been created. And now the system that we have supported doing all that is going to turn around and say, oh, guess what? We took the money.
Yeah.
Now, the reality is we're all complicit here, Greg. Okay? We knew this was going on. The drug running has been going on in almost every neighborhood in America. The mortgage fraud has been going on in every neighborhood in America. It wasn't just Washington and Wall Street doing this. We've known that we were on a non-sustainable trajectory for over 60 years. Okay, well now the exit is here. Now the end game is here, and now we're going to have to face the music. What that's going to look like is very,
let me ask you a couple of questions about that. Just a couple of quick questions. Would you take money out of a bank? Would you have yourself a stack of 10s and 20s and 1s and 5s and at home? Would you have some money outside the system? Would you still keep?
I would be prepared to go for some period of time outside the system, and how long, whether it's cash or liquor bottles or brooms or food or precious metals coin, I would have provision to go for some period of time, whatever. That's number one. Number two, does it make sense to have holdings in a variety of different places, including precious metals in a variety of different places? Yes, it does. But the third thing, and this is where I've spent the majority of my money for the last 20 years, it pays to have real solutions. In other words, it pays to have figured out how you're going to take care of yourself without government health care and without government social security and without government programs, okay? And how you're going to team up with other people to do it. It pays to start businesses that help us find ways of navigating through this without all that stuff.
Which is,
so
well,
we see.
Go ahead. For some people, they
This
just.
is what you're doing, which is what I'm doing. Okay, I don't spend any time watching CBS News tell me lies. I watch you. Okay?
Well, and that's why I wanted to bring
You
up the next
start-
thing. Is that most people in.
You started
Go ahead.
a business to help people, because we need media that helps us
Yes.
go through. We need investment advisors who help us go through. We need, farmers who provide us fresh food. There's a whole world of businesses that, so get out of the legacy systems, stop depending on anybody to fix them. They can't fix them. Leave. Leave the legacy systems and start inventing, take a couple of pieces of, folding chairs from the Titanic and start building arcs. Find other people who are building arcs. Just get going. Don't worry about those guys.
Tale of two stories. One friend of mine, I say, hey, what do you think about this? Just a friend of mine having a conversation. I say, what do you think about all this? And we're like-minded. He's a friend of mine. And he says, I'm buying slugs. That was his answer. I'm buying shotgun slugs. He says, I think I'm going to need ammunition. And he's not worried about.
You are.
He told me, he said, I'm not worried about the government coming to my house and kicking the door in and throwing me in a FEMA camp. That costs money. I'm afraid of the neighbor down the street who has no money, has no food, who's going to say, hey, the lights are on. You hear a generator going. They must have. He says, that's what I'm worried about. That's one guy. Friend of mine. I was out.
It's absolutely true. I mean, I can tell you stories of how my guns have saved my life.
But most people that I talk to, and I have quit even trying to warn people because they're so in denial, they are so oblivious, and I think some of this is willful, that they just think, oh, nothing's ever going to happen. What do you mean the dollar's going to collapse? We're going to have calamity? What do you mean that the banks are going to shut down? Come on, they couldn't do that. Well, the whole thing, we're not going to have that bad of a time. They won't let that happen. And most people are like that. And I think when this old system collapses and the new system is going to be full of the people on the boat.
Well, but I think the collapse is going to be a slow burn. I don't think you're going to have a big bang collapse. I think you're going to have a slow burn, and I think the leadership has the power to engineer it. Now, it can fall apart. We can get another 2008. So I sort of give it 70% chance of slow burn, 20 to 25% chance of another 2008, and the bail-ins get out of control, and then 5% of collapse. I think collapse is a very small chance. Now, where you see collapse is you see collapse not in one big bang globally, but Russia collapses in the 90s. Then you see different Eastern European countries collapse. You see Cyprus collapse. So you see New Orleans collapse during Katrina. You see Indonesia collapsed during the tsunami. So you don't see a big bang collapse. You see different pieces, sort of sequentially collapsed. And the biggest risk of collapse that any one of us has is, we're in New Orleans when Katrina comes, or we're in Indonesia when the tsunami comes. So those are the kind of collapses that we're individually going to face. If you haven't archived all your documents, if you don't have a good disaster recovery plan in this day and age, you're making a big mistake. But it's not because of the Big Bang collapse. It's because those sequential collapses are happening all the time, and they're going to keep happening. If you have the legacy systems deteriorating, bridges can fall down, roads can fall apart. You can have all of these different sort of collapsing things, dynamics that can happen in the legacy systems.
And so I guess as this thing is designed to collapse, obviously it's being engineered, to your point, that there's going to be times where these sequentially collapse are going to hit you eventually. and you have to have time. You have to be able to live on your own without the government for a month or 2 months or 3 weeks or 5 months or whatever until the system's back. Is that what you're telling me?
Right. Right. So in Kentucky, the power goes down in the winter for some long period of time. You have to be prepared to deal with that. I have a generator that kicks on automatically every time the electricity. I have to be prepared to provide my own electricity for 2 or 3 days if the electricity goes down. I live in that kind of world. So we're definitely seeing the infrastructure in many places spread thin or deteriorate and could collapse. So, we have to deal. Sorry about that. We have to deal with that.
And and last question for me. Who's your
sorry.
That's okay. Who's your most likely candidate that we would be going to war with? Russia, China, India? Who's the most likely candidate if we do get into a little shooting war? Who are we gonna go after? I mean, China wants to be the world's reserve currency, and I can't see how the U.S. wants that to happen.
To me, there's no way China becomes the reserve currency. They don't begin. We control the sea lanes, not China. We control the satellite lanes, not China. I just don't see. China has a big problem in that they don't have enough water and they have too many people and not enough employment. They can't. Their political problem is keeping everybody employed. They can't do that without Europe and the United States buying from them. So I don't see how China even gets close to being the reserve currency. I just, to me, that's 20 years down the road. I don't see it.
So the good news is it looks like the U.S., with this coming collapse for some of the people who are the people stuck in the pension system, people who are stuck in the old health care system, people who are stuck in old technology jobs, they're going to get ground up. They're going to either change or die.
Well,
right?
Well, here's what you're going to have. You have the leadership pulling back to North America and making North America a powerhouse. As they do that, they're going to radically re-engineer a lot of how things are done, particularly at the local and municipal level. They don't want interference. They just want to come in and do their radical re-engineering and not be bothered with the rights of people. That's why you're seeing this effort to bring in the guns and to have gun control. But it's a radical re-engineering that makes them much more self-sufficient and much more powerful globally. So if there is a collapse, it's going to be in the BRIC nations. It's going to be in the emerging markets. It's not going to be here.
Do you think they're going to get our guns? Do you think?
No, I don't think they will.
You what?
I don't think they will. I think we're going to have a sort of balance of power standoff. But the reality is that what you're going to see is a world that is a world of great tension. And a world where it's going to be increasingly hard to understand what's really going on behind the scenes. But I think these guys are bringing, the pendulum back to North America, and they're saying, we're going to make sure that North America is strong, even if the rest collapses. So I think the emerging markets are in for a tougher period than they've had for the last 5 years, because the Anglo-American alliance is going to play hardball.
Catherine Austin Fitts, Solari.com. You are the writer of the Solari Report. Thank you so much for being on USAWatchdog.com. I'll tell you, and I'll say this again, I don't mean to butter your bread, I don't mean to stroke you, but you totally different take, and this is why I put on so many different people. Totally different take on what's going on in the world. As I started out talking about Jim Rogers and Jim Rickards and Dr. Mark Farber, which you're all talking about a big transition. You just see something better for the U.S. than what they're seeing.
I drive across the country a lot. You drive around Dallas, there's no collapse. There's a boom of unprecedented magnitude. It's not just oil and gas. It's high-tech manufacturing. It's high-tech, a lot of things. It's biotech, a lot of things. There's no collapse. The breakaway civilization is reinvesting and building something very, very powerful.
Okay, that double ending there. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you so much for being on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you, Craig. Have a great day.
You too.